So the Tories voted to make themselves unaccountable and to rubber stamp the fact many of them, despite being elected by the public, do not choose to serve them. They choose instead, as Owen Paterson has demonstrated, to serve corporate interests who will pay them a lot of money and abuse their position as an MP, a lawmaker, to suit the interests of those people, paying them more than their already generous salaries. It's corrupt, it is anti-democratic, it is banned, and as you'd expect, Owen Paterson was quite correctly found guilty of such acts and faced punishment, a ridiculously lenient 30-day suspension from Parliament. Big bloody deal. Why then did the Tories bend over backwards to block such a pathetically weak sentence being enforced? Paterson hardly needs the money despite his corporate greed. He's a millionaire. He wasn't made to pay his corporate fees back. He wasn't even to lose his wages. Why not just take the punishment? Arrogance and a belief you're above the law? It was clearly on show as so many Tories came out to vote in his support against what amounted to little more than a slapped wrist, and essentially rewriting the rules to suit themselves with all the bad optics that came with that. Thus followed the inevitable U-turn in the face of much public disgust. Even Tory supporting papers were putting the boot into Johnson and co, and Paterson, seeing his support evaporate, decided to quit with immediate effect, showing how little he actually cared about doing his elected job or the constituents he was elected to represent. But only now are the Tories saying they're sorry. For those that voted to uphold corruption and support Paterson, it's far, far too late. Every last one of them needs voting out if we're to have any standards in the running of this country. So Owen Paterson has quit his second job as an MP. If old politics called it exactly right, it can only be considered his primary role, his primary form of employment, when he's taking considerably more than his parliamentary salary from lobbyists whose interests he was found to be prioritising instead of those of his constituents. This is, as you'd rightfully expect, banned. Parliamentarians are elected to represent the people who vote for them, not others who might pay them lots of money. Paterson had the gall to not only defend himself, but cry victim about it and say on live TV he'd do it again. So what did this miserable bunch of shysters allegedly running the country, but more accurately ruining it, decide to do? Attack the independent standards body put in place to oversee such things do not happen and are not allowed to go unpunished, and push to abolish it and appoint a committee of their own, full of Tories, to oversee such things instead. Well, that can't possibly be going wrong, can it? They truly think we're all stupid. Such is the level of corruption, moral bankruptcy, arrogance, and belief that they are above the law, so dominant in this Tory regime. They genuinely thought for a moment they could get away with this, with Johnson imposing a 3-line whip, no less, on his own MPs to support this alleged reform, which would have effectively let Owen Paterson off the hook for his crimes. As awful for the country as a Conservative government is, as huge as Johnson's majority is, and as sycophantic as Tory MPs so often are, voting along party lines instead of in constituents' interests, as they seem to do all of the time, 6 Conservatives actually defied that 3-line whip, and 98 of them abstained. That still meant 242 Tory MPs voted to get their mate Paterson off the hook, though. Every last one of these people voted to endorse corruption amongst themselves, to place themselves beyond reproach, and to set up a body that would ensure they could get away with it again and again with impunity. Every last one of them lacks the moral fibre, courage, and conviction to serve anyone but their own self-interest. And as such, these 242 MPs need to be removed. That ought to be by their own local Conservative associations, who should be disgusted with them ahead of the next election. But failing that, and I can imagine that will fail in a great many cases, that last sentence won't trouble too many of these Tory MPs, I'm sure, they need to be voted out. Anyone voting for such people would themselves be voting to make themselves a doormat. Something for these Tories to scrape their boots on. Why would you vote for that? And to allow the laws of this country to be remade and rewritten to suit a privileged few who happen to be in power. Time we thought better of ourselves and demanded far better from our representatives. It shouldn't be a lot to ask that they actually represent us, we who elect them, who go out and vote for them, and not for their own self-serving interests, not for themselves, and not for wealthy lobbyists who feel they can, every MP that they approach has got a price on their head, and it's just a case of seeing whether they're prepared to pay it or not to get what they want. Of course, the excuses are coming thick and fast. Peter Bottomley, one of the 6 Tory MPs who actually voted against that 3-line whip, has complained again, about the second time in as many weeks, about MPs' pay. He reckons if they were paid more, people like Paterson wouldn't need to take second jobs. They're on over £80,000 a year. This feeble excusing of greed is just classic Conservative. But of course, they're more than happy to vote to impoverish you, whilst bemoaning how hard up they are, despite earning about 4 times the national average salary. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business minister, thought it would be a good idea to point the finger of blame at Catherine Stone, the parliamentary commissioner for standards, who found Paterson guilty, wrote a 175-page report showing why he was guilty, and indeed who as a public servant cannot defend herself publicly, and as somebody who believes in public ethics wouldn't dream of trying. He thought she ought to consider her position. Paterson was banged to rights, yet this attempt to rewrite the rules to suit themselves meant ministers felt comfortable enough going on live TV and slamming those who were upholding accountability, that were upholding due diligence and procedure in defence of those breaking them. Educational Minister Nadhim Zahawi, a typical go-to bullshitter for the government, trotted out the old chestnut about not playing politics, despite that being exactly what they were doing themselves, putting a 3-line whip in place to do it, and it all blew up in their faces. He admitted, however, that his party had made a mistake, but they're only regretting their actions because the public decided enough is enough, and we're not having this. He even admitted to voting for this, despite not having read that 175-page report on Paterson's actions. How many other Tories were too lazy to do the reading? They regret their move backfiring. They do not regret what they did. The backlash is what prompted this climb down. If there's one thing that terrifies Johnson, it's the thought of being unpopular, the thought of being disliked. The minute people stop going, "Oh, Boris," and start going, "No, Boris," he quickly rose back. He ought to be one of the most detested prime ministers ever, a loathsome, hard-right racist with his trousers permanently around his ankles and no idea how many kids he has. This move has as much to do with the Commissioner for Standards coming for him very soon as anything else. Let's face it, Paterson could easily cope with a 30-day suspension. There's so much more afoot here. Johnson always brings himself down. His career is littered with examples of that, and his fall can't come soon enough this time. It'd come a lot sooner if the opposition weren't led by a complete dud, as Angela Eagle has described him, like Keir Starmer, but it's happening anyway despite that. The Tories brought themselves down with their corrupt ways before. It looks like they'll take themselves down again. If a weakling like Starmer benefits from that, though, it'll be a tragedy, since his predecessor pledged to do away with second jobs for MPs. Just ban them. And why won't the Tories do that? Simple. They're in it for themselves. And being an MP just doesn't pay enough for the likes of them. So how about we stop voting them in full stop, eh? And vote in representatives that'll actually work for us and our interests instead of just their own.